Deep within the silent, velvet void of the Orion Arm, the Interstellar Conservatory stands as a monument to eternal observation. For 5,000 years, its crystalline halls have gathered the whispers of 1,000 worlds, yet none have been as predictably underwhelming as the small blue planet known as Earth. High Archivist Xylus has spent centuries overseeing the Terran sector. To Xylus, humanity was never a subject of awe, but rather a tedious biological curiosity, a species seemingly trapped in a perpetual loop of self-inflicted chaos. He watched from his silent perch as empires rose on foundations of vanity and crumbled under the weight of their own greed, documenting each repetitive cycle with the detached indifference of a scholar examining a petri dish. For 50 centuries, the classification for Earth remained static, harmless, level 1. The humans were viewed as a noisy, wasteful race, consuming their planet's limited resources with a short-sightedness that Xylus found fundamentally irrational. Their history was a messy, blood-soaked ledger of ego and tribalism, a long series of wars fought over invisible borders and intangible myths. They seemed destined to eventually flicker out, another failed experiment in the vast laboratory of the cosmos, leaving behind nothing but a thin layer of plastic and radioactive ash in their geological record. Xylus had seen it all before, and he expected nothing more from the primates of the third sun. However, as the 21st century reached its midpoint, the advanced sensors within the conservatory began to register a frequency that defied every archival precedent. It was not the usual chaotic hum of radio waves or the clatter of orbital debris. Instead, it was a profound surge in what Xylus could only describe as collective subconscious resonance. It was as if the 8 billion disparate minds on the surface were beginning to vibrate in a terrifying, unified harmony, a mental synchronization that suggested a sudden leap in cognitive evolution. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This resonance was not a product of technology, but something far more intrinsic and ancient. Driven by a rare spark of curiosity, Xylus shifted his focus to a remote research facility nestled deep within the jagged peaks of the Swiss Alps. There, a human scientist named Dr. Aris Thorne was conducting experiments that should have been impossible for a level 1 species. Her work centered on a concept she termed intentional reality, the radical hypothesis that human consciousness possessed the inherent ability to directly manipulate the fundamental properties of matter through sheer, focused intent. While her peers dismissed her as a dreamer, Xylus's instruments told a different story. Her laboratory was a beacon of psychic energy, illuminating the hidden architecture of the human mind and revealing a dormant power that had remained locked away for millennia. The archivist's cold, analytical mind began to process a terrifying new reality. As he cross-referenced these new findings with the long history of human violence, he realized with a shudder of his crystalline core. For 5,000 years, humans had been unknowingly keeping their own godlike potential at bay, acting as their own jailers to prevent their volatile, unrefined emotions from tearing the very fabric of existence apart. But that ancient dam was finally beginning to fracture, and the suppression was failing, exposing the universe to a species it was not prepared to face. Suddenly, an alarm chimed across Xylus's primary interface. In Earth's high orbit, one of the organization's invisible phase-shifted observation satellites had just been detected. It was a feat of observation that defied the laws of physics as the conservatory understood them. At the research facility below, Dr. Aris Thorne looked up from her monitors, her eyes filled with a terrifyingly clear awareness. She wasn't just staring at the empty sky. She was looking directly into the heart of the surveillance array. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Watchers were being seen, and the Predator was starting to realize that its prey had finally woken up. The silence of the interstellar conservatory was shattered not by sound, but by a cascade of frantic data streams that threatened to overwhelm the crystalline lattice of the central hub. Across the grand observation deck, icons flashed in a violent, urgent crimson that the organization had not seen in eons. The impossible was happening. In all of galactic history, the transition from a primitive Level 1 society to a Level 5 power took millennia of careful evolution and social refinement. It was a slow, predictable crawl toward maturity. Yet, on the monitors before High Archivist Xylers, the metrics for humanity were shifting in real time. It was no longer a curve, it was a vertical ascent. The species was leapfrogging through entire eras of development in mere hours, their collective consciousness expanding with a speed that defied every known model of socio-political growth. The heavy doors to the observation deck hissed open, admitting the imposing, broad-shouldered figure of General Vaan. His presence was like a cold wind cutting through the ancient halls. Unlike Xylers, who viewed the universe as a vast library to be curated, Vaan saw it as a garden that required constant weeding to remain orderly. He stared at the holographic projection of Earth, his eyes narrowed with a militant disgust as he watched the energy spikes rise. He argued with a low, rumbling voice that the protocol was clear. Any species that bypassed the natural limitations of the physical realm without the requisite moral framework was a Level 5 galactic threat. Vaan demanded an immediate preemptive purification. To him, the humans were a virus that had suddenly gained sentience and the keys to the laboratory, and he believed that if Earth were not extinguished now, the fire they were lighting would consume every star in the Orion Arm. While the Council debated behind closed doors, the dramatic shift on the surface of Earth grew even more chaotic. The humans were not building massive machines or launching primitive nuclear rockets to defend themselves, as the simulations had predicted. Instead, the very atmosphere around them seemed to respond to their shifting moods. In areas of high concentration, the weather patterns ceased to follow traditional meteorological models, bending instead to the collective emotional state of the populace. In the great cities, the jagged edges of concrete and steel began to smooth into organic, flowing shapes, reshaped by nothing more than the focused desire of those who lived within them. They were bypassing the middleman of technology entirely, willing their environment to change with an ease that suggested they were finally remembering how to breathe. Xylers found himself unable to look away from Dr. Aris Thorne. He watched her through the phase-shifted drones, his analytical detachment eroding into something far more complex and dangerous. He saw her standing in the center of her laboratory, surrounded by equipment that was rapidly becoming obsolete, as her own mind did the work of 1,000 supercomputers. She was the epicenter of this storm, a conductor for a symphony of psychic energy he had never witnessed before in a biological entity. There was a terrifying beauty in the way her consciousness reached out, touching the fundamental strings of the universe with a gentle, inquisitive touch. Xylas realized that he wasn't just observing a specimen anymore. He was witnessing the birth of a goddess, and it filled him with a mixture of profound awe and paralyzing dread. The true reason for the galactic panic became clear as the energy readings stabilized at impossible levels. The humans were violating the most sacred laws of thermodynamics. In all other known life forms, energy had to be harvested, converted, and expended in a closed system. But the humans were generating raw, usable energy from nothing but their own willpower. Their intent was creating matter and heat where there was none, defying the fundamental rules of entropy that held the universe together. They were a perpetual motion machine of pure consciousness, a source of infinite power that threatened to unbalance the energetic equilibrium of the entire galaxy. If 8 billion minds learned to use this power in unison, they could rewrite the laws of physics on a whim, rendering the conservatory's advanced technology as useless as stone tools. Desperate to protect the species that had finally managed to surprise him, Xylus began a dangerous game of digital shadows. He manipulated the reports, masking the most extreme energy spikes and scrubbing the most alarming data points from the central archives, hoping to give Dr. Thorne and her people more time to stabilize their new reality. But General Vaughn was a master of surveillance. He had his own shadow analysts monitoring the sector, and when he discovered Xylus's deception, the confrontation was brief and brutal. Vaughn stripped Xylus of his command and immediately ordered the deployment of the cloaked invasion fleet. Thousands of silent, lethal vessels began their descent toward the solar system, their weapons primed to erase the human world before the awakening could be completed. As the massive fleet crossed the threshold of Earth's atmosphere, cloaked in technology that had remained undetected by lesser civilizations for eons, the alien crews prepared for a clinical execution. But then every screen on every ship flickered and died. The silent humming of the interstellar engines was replaced by a low, rhythmic vibration that resonated in the very bones of the invaders. Across every frequency, through every telepathic link, and on every monitor in the fleet, a single message manifested, clear and undeniable. It wasn't a broadcast from a radio tower, but a direct projection from a billion unified minds. "We see you," the message echoed with the weight of an awakening giant. The hunters had arrived, only to find that the prey was not just waiting, but had been watching them the entire time. General Vaughn's fleet sat in the vast, silent reaches of Earth's atmosphere, their cloaks discarded like useless rags. The gleaming hulls of their ships, once the pinnacle of galactic engineering, felt fragile against the radiance from the planet below. Earth was no longer a sphere of blue and green. It had become a beacon of bioluminescent gold, pulsing with the heartbeat of 8 billion souls. Inside the flagship, Vaughn's face was a mask of fury. To him, this wasn't evolution, it was a cosmic cancer. He screamed the final order to fire, and 1,000 orbital cannons unleashed antimatter slugs and plasma beams intended to scour the world into ash. But the fire never reached the ground. The projectiles did not explode. Instead, they struck an invisible membrane of human intent and ceased to function. In a display that defied every law of physics, the screaming plasma cooled into drifting cherry blossom petals, and the antimatter slugs dissolved into iridescent dust that glittered in the morning sun. The humans were not fighting back. They were refusing to accept the reality of violence. They were rewriting the local physics of the fleet's trajectory, transforming instruments of genocide into a reign of beauty. On the bridge, Vaughn collapsed, his eyes wide with shock as he watched his powerful arsenal turn into a cosmic garden. Suddenly, the air in the Interstellar Conservatory's central chamber began to shimmer. High Archivist Xylus watched as molecules rearranged into the translucent form of Dr. Aris Thorne. She did not appear as a conqueror, but as a woman standing in a quiet laboratory, her eyes filled with clarity. She looked at the crystalline council and smiled, her voice echoing directly within their minds. She explained that humanity had never been a primitive species. They were an ancient power that had chosen to sleep, locking their potential behind physical limitations. They had done this to protect the universe from their own immaturity, waiting until they could transcend their internal shadows before reclaiming their place among the stars. We were not becoming a threat, she whispered, her voice a gentle telepathic balm to Xylas. We were merely waking up from a self-imposed fever dream. We have finally learned that the strength of the mind is only as great as the compassion of the human heart. Our war with ourselves is over. The council sat in silence as the realization dawned. The panic that had gripped the ancient and vast conservatory was based on a misunderstanding. The galaxy had not feared human violence, it had feared human will. They were the only species that did not need to conquer, because they could simply create. They were the first to realize that the universe was not a clockwork of scarcity, but a canvas that could be reshaped through love and intent. Xylas stepped forward, ignoring the protests of the silent militant advisors. He reached out his hand toward the projection of Thorn, acknowledging the bridge built between their worlds. He was designated as the first ambassador between the conservatory and the new Earth, a role he accepted with purpose. He saw now that his personal obsession with Thorn was a resonance of the cosmic unified soul. As the first diplomatic missions began, the starry map of the galaxy started to change. The stars themselves began to shift in the deep night sky, drifting into peaceful, harmonious patterns. The humans were not moving them with engines, but with a collective wish for a better neighborhood. Untold millions of barren worlds were touched by the warmth of human intent, blooming into lush paradises. The era of fear was over, replaced by a period of celestial renovation. Looking out from the observation deck, Xylas watched as the Orion Arm began to glow with a vibrant and warm light, realizing that for the very first time in all of history, the universe was not just being watched. It was being loved into something magnificent and eternal across the vast cosmos and truly beautiful.